So what if I told you that there was a series of games that came out recently, let's say around the late 90s, that kind of influenced everything we see today? A lot of this video, this audio is going to explain one of the very first games by Goichi Suda, who we know as Suda 51, or if you want to get very technical, Suda 51. Anyhow, Suda had made a game called Moonlight Syndrome for Human Entertainment when he was still with them. He had left the company and decided to create the company we know today as Grasshopper Manufacturer. His very first game was a little-known title for the PS1 or PSX or whatever the heck you want to call it, called The Silver, and which we know today now as the Silver Case. A lot of people have been wondering what the hell's going on with the story of that entire game. I've played through it, do have some understanding of psychology, and I'm just going to explain this pretty thus right. And to make this a bit easier on both VidMe and YouTube, I'm going to separate analysis of the transmitter cases and the placebo report dialogue, which transmitter is told through the story of the protagonist named Akira, which we won't find out much about him until, let's say, episode 4, episode 5. On top of that, placebo has the protagonist of Tokyo Morishima, which his story adds a little bit of element to the entire game. Now, Akira's story is basically he's voiceless. You do see his face once. It ain't a pretty sight either. But to give some context to the Silver Case, you have to go back to 1997 and to a case which was the Kobe child murders. And this was 1997, 2 years before the original Silver Case came out. And he had heard about the exploits of Boy A, who is known in the system as Saito Sakakibara, who killed a 10-year-old girl and an 11-year-old boy. Of course, people thought he didn't do it until finally he confessed the murders to his mother. These days, Boy A is out in society, but his murderous intent prompted the Japanese Diet, which is the government, to lower the age of responsibility for murder from 16, which it was originally at the time, to 14. But 7 years later, the murder of Satomi Mitare by girl A, which was known as the Saipo slashing, they're still in a limbo because of that. But it was this case, the Kobe child murders, that prompted kind of what we see with the Silver Case. Now, I'm going to go ahead and start with the prologue called Case 0, which is known as Lunatics. Lunatics is basically just your basic introductory, patches everything together from one game to the next. As we said, Moonlight Syndrome, I believe, and if I've gotten the name wrong, yes. Moonlight Syndrome, I believe, is the name of that one. Yep. Silver Case kind of takes place after that game by Human Entertainment, which is the Moonlight Syndrome. Sorry to repeat myself. Moonlight Syndrome involved Ryo-san, whose sister was killed. I haven't played that game, honestly. It's kind of loosely important because Episode 0 starts out with one of the main characters that you will see in the silver case, and that would be one of the lead detectives, Tetsugoro Kusabi, which Tetsu is 44 years old. He's jaded. He's seen it all. He started the events in motion because he's the one that actually opened up the mentioned silver case. But Tetsu is driving along the road on his way home when all of a sudden he gets stopped by a young boy carrying a severed head. Anyone who has played the Moonlight Syndrome knows that this is Ryo Kazan with his sister's Kaori's head. Of course, Ryo has lost it completely. He doesn't know which way is up, which way is down. To use an American phrase, the guy doesn't know his elbow from his asshole anymore. So, Ryo stands in front of Kusabi's vehicle and points a revolver at him. And shoots. Of course, Kusabi is a trained agent, so he has the wherewithal to move his head. As he moves his head, the shot whizzes by him, and Kazan takes off. Of course, this prompts Tetsu to call for backup, which prompts him to introduce another 2 pieces of the entire game. Which, to explain everything, there's 2 sections of the police force, and I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. Central Police is the main police force inside what they call the 24 wards, which is a fictional part of Tokyo. The 24 wards is a bit of an experiment. It's a thought control, population control, whatever you want to call it. It's a sick experiment. However, all of this won't play in until the later episodes. Central is divided. It's just Central is from various officers. Between the various officers, there lies in Tetsu's unit, which is the Heinous Crimes Unit, or as it's known in Japan, the High Murder Unit. The other side is Public Security, which those guys are basically your GSG-9 type operatives. The history was that both sides are different. The Heinous Crimes Unit was founded by the tech organization, or the tech people. The Public Security was founded by the CCO, which is the Civil Conservationalist, organization. Those 2 factions were a part of policy making in the 24 wards, and they came together in an alliance, and that alliance is shown in the police force. 2 different forces, 2 different tactics. Kusabi is basically the man on the street with a little bit of a twist. Now, here goes. Kusabi is a jurisdiction detective, but it's him against whatever. So, to not complicate things further, he calls headquarters, and headquarters calls in Public Security, which introduces the 2 other characters that are essential to this. One in a background, and the other is your protagonist. The first one we're going to introduce is the Commander Daigo Natsumi, who is a former member of the HC unit, but he left because it got a bit too much for him. And of course, one of his charges that the name, universally, you can name him whatever, about like Link in The Legend of Zelda, but his universal name is Akira. Of course, you have the two counterparts, Sakamoto and Imoata, which you will probably root for Imoata to get killed. Trust me. Here's the thing. They're called in to take care of Kazan, and they're given the order to, one, avoid Kusabi, because again, the two factions, they don't theoretically get along. However, as Natsumi and Tetsu were both colleagues with the regional agencies, they do get along, but as it goes, the two organizations as a whole don't get along. Different methods, different ideals. Now, the other part that you also notice is that a lot of this episode 0 is going to be your introduction on how things work. I am going to tell you, it's not going to hold your hand. The controls are still a bit 1990-ish. You'll live with it. Now, the other part of the story is that they trace Rio to the building. They try to trap him, but Imoata is a bit of an idiot. Defies orders. They tell him to wait for backup or to wait for the rest of the unit. He charges in ahead. You're there trying to solve the riddles, and then you find the first victim, who is hypnotized. Her eyes are rolling into her head. It's a pretty graphic scene. Of course, you rush through the stage, and you find Imoata, who was shot in the arm. Again, you're not going to feel very sorry for this idiot very often. Shot in the arm, ordered to fall back, defies orders constantly. Sakamoto is, of course, designated as team leader. Akira is the muscle, which, to use TV tropes, ideal as much as I'm loath to, he is the big guy in a Sendai unit. He's the guy that is the tank, is the muscle, but sometimes he does use his brain. He is smart with puzzles, as you'll find out. The murders continue as they make it through the second floor and find the severed head of a young girl, or a girl without her head, which is reminiscent to the Kobe child murders and does kind of influence at whenever they did this remake, the Seispo slashing. But you won't find that until later on, the slashing, that is. Now, make it through the third floor, you find out that Rio has changed the password to the doors to the building you've chased him in, which means he still has some cognitive intelligence, but again, driver, not at vehicle. More or less. Now, here's the thing that everyone else should take note of. He's changed the locks, he's out to lunch. Now here comes the fun part. You break through the door, and it's almost like, hey, he let me through. Yeah, you should worry. Akira does make it out, and Natsume does spot him. Or just wondering where his backup is. Is this guy keeping up? By the way, no, he hasn't. You go around through the roof of Cauliflower, you find 2 more victims, 1 girl laid out, another girl bleeding. However, as your job is not to rescue them, you have to go back out to the roof, and then when you circle around, the moon shines, and there's Rio with his revolver pointed right at you. Of course, as this is the first mission, and you're not used to this stuff, unfortunately, he does get the better on you until Tetsu shows up and puts a hole in his brain. Now, here's the other aspect you'll find out is that, again, Kusabi has been there, done that. And he's pretty cold-blooded. The other thing that you'll notice is that during the conversation, the faction warfare mentality comes out for a moment until both Kusabi and Akira hear the specter of crime. And here's how they regard crime in this world. Basically, they see crime as a virus. Crime is something that has to be washed out, destroyed. And that's going to be a lot of the concept of the rest of the game as well. And one name that gets mentioned is Kamui Uehara, which he was the killer that Tetsu had arrested 20 years prior. Which, again, at the time of this game, he's 44, so he would have been 24 as a young regional agent. But Episode 0 does establish two things. One, that a lot of the people in public security were pretty much the ruffians of the street. They were taken off the street. Two, Kusabi and Akira do have something in common. They both heard the ghost, the murderous ghost of Kamui, or the murderous ghost of crime. And if you go through the game, you'll realize that Sakamoto, when he was on the roof, when he joined them, didn't hear it, the ghost. That's going to be vaguely important later, around episode 2 or so. Now, the last thing that you should pick up from episode 0 is that Tetsu knows what's going on. He's always known what's going on. As he gives advice to the people that this is just going to keep going. And he also gives a bit of a prelude of Kamui's antics. Everything that he tells them will lead into episode 1. And of course, this is not exactly comprehensive, but this is as much of a story as I can give, and it does have spoilers. One, Akira is not exactly normal. Kusabi's not exactly normal. But none of this story is exactly normal either. The next one is probably going to cover episode 1, which is Decoy Man, and trust me, there's going to be a phrase that is said by one of the characters that if you try to understand this story, they'll tell you why you really can't.